Hey everyone, welcome to chapter 11 of The Art of War. This is the final chapter, but it is also the longest chapter. This one starts on page 56, doesn't end until 72, so you might want to get a snack or plan to take a couple of breaks. All right, here we go. The 9 situations. The Art of War recognizes 9 varieties of ground: dispersive ground, facile ground, contentious ground, open ground, ground of intersecting highways, serious ground, difficult ground, hemmed-in ground, and desperate ground. So, as we know, the author does this a bunch. They set us up to say, hey, I'm going to talk to you about these 9 situations. And then they delve a little deeper into each of the 9 situations. If you can keep track of that in your head as you read, then it will all continue to make sense to you. And so I would just encourage you to take the time to listen or read carefully and be like, okay, which of the 9 situations are we talking about here? Also, as you're taking notes, you might want to jot down those 9 situations. Give yourself some space so that you can kind of write notes about each of those 9 situations. And then I would definitely be in your note taking, writing things like stars or highlighting anytime you hear something in the Art of War that applies to your battle. So I would be paying special attention to that. All right, here we go. When a chieftain is fighting in his own territory, it is dispersive ground, so called because the soldiers, being near to their homes and anxious to see their wives and children, are likely to seize the opportunity afforded by a battle and scatter in every direction. When he is penetrated into hostile territory, but to no great distance, it is facile ground. Ground that is of great advantage to either side is contentious ground. And here comes an anecdote. When Lu Kuang was returning from his triumphant expedition to Turkestan in AD 385, he had got as far as Aiho, laden with spoils. Liang Xi, administrator of Liangchao, taking advantage of the death of Fu Qin, king of Qin, wanted to bar his way into the province. Yang Han, governor of Kaochang, counseled Liang Xi, saying, Lu Kuang is fresh from his victories in the west, and his soldiers are vigorous and mettlesome. If we oppose him in the shifting sands of the desert, we shall be no match for him, and he must therefore try a different plan. Let us hasten to occupy the defile at the mouth of Kuawu Pass, thus cutting him off from supplies of water, and when his troops are prostrated with thirst, we can dictate our own terms without moving. Or if you think that the pass I mentioned is too far off, we could make a stand against him at the Aiwu Pass, which is nearer. The cunning and resource of Su Fang himself would be expended in vain against the enormous strength of those 2 positions. Liang Xi, refusing to act on this advice, was overwhelmed and swept away by the invader. Okay. Number 4. Ground on which each side has liberty of movement is open ground. Ground that forms the key to 3 contiguous states, so that he who occupies it first has most of the empire at his command, is ground of intersecting highways. When an army has penetrated into the heart of a hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear, it is serious ground. Mountain forests, rugged steeps, marshes, and fens, all country that is hard to traverse, is called difficult ground. Ground that is reached through narrow gorges and from which we can only retire by tortuous paths, so that a small number of the enemy would suffice to crush a large body of our men, this is hemmed-in ground. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay, this is desperate ground. And now he's going to tell us what to do on each of those pieces of ground. So if you've taken notes and you've left some spaces, go back and here's what you should do on each of those pieces of ground. On dispersive ground, therefore, fight not. Remember, dispersive was where all of the people who are fighting live there, and they can just disperse to their own, they can run away easily. So don't fight on dispersive ground is what Sun Tzu says. And now what I've just done, you should do for the rest of these. On facile ground, halt not. On contentious ground, attack not. On open ground, do not try to block the enemy's way. On ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies. On serious ground, gather in plunder. In difficult ground, keep steadily on the march. On hemmed-in ground, resort to stratagem, and on desperate ground, fight. Now, the reason you want to go back and be really clear about all this is because one of those might apply to your battle, and then you have a piece of advice that you can analyze. All right, moving on. Those who were called skillful leaders of old knew how to drive a wedge between the enemy's front and rear, to prevent cooperation between his large and small divisions, to hinder the good troops from rescuing the bad, the officers from rallying their men. When the enemy's men were scattered, they prevented them from concentrating. Even when their forces were united, they managed to keep them in disorder. When it was to their advantage, they made a forward move. When otherwise, they stopped still. If asked how to cope with a great host of the enemy in orderly array and on the point of marching to the attack, say, begin by seizing something that your opponent holds dear. Then he will be amenable to your will. Rapidity is the essence of war. Take advantage of the enemy's unreadiness. Make your way by unexpected routes and attack unguarded spots. More anecdote. In AD 227, Meng Ta, governor of Xin Cheng, under the Wei Emperor Wen Ti, was meditating defection to the house of Shu and had entered into correspondence with Choukou Liang, prime minister of that state. The Wei general Sima I was then military governor of Wan, and getting wind of Meng Ta's treachery, he at once set off with an army to anticipate his revolt, having previously cajoled him by a specious message of friendly import. Suma's officers came to him and said, if Meng Ta has leagued himself with Wu and Shu, the matter should be thoroughly investigated before we make a move. Suma I replied, Meng Ta is an unprincipled man, and we ought to go and punish him at once while he is still wavering and before he is thrown off the mask. And then, by a series of forced marches, he brought his army under the walls of Hincheng within the space of 8 days. Now, Meng Ta had previously said in a letter to Chu Liang, Wan is 1,200 li from here. When the news of my revolt reaches Suma I, he will at once inform his imperial master, but it will be a whole month before any steps can be taken, and by that time my city will be well fortified. Besides, Suma I is sure not to come himself, and the generals that will be sent against us are not worth troubling about. The next letter, however, was filled with consternation. Though only 8 days have passed since I threw off my allegiance, an army is already at the city gates. What malicious rapidity is this? A fortnight later, Xin Cheng had fallen and Meng Ta had lost his head. In other words, act swiftly. Here we have yet another anecdote, so I'm going to let you pause and read that if you'd like, and I will move on the other side of it. All right, we are now here. The following are principles to be observed by an invading force. The further you penetrate into a country, the greater will be the solidarity of your troops, and thus the defenders will not prevail against you. Make forays into fertile country in order to supply your army with food. 2. Carefully study the well-being of your men and do not overtax them. Concentrate your energy and hoard your strength. Keep your army continually on the move and devise unfathomable plans. And here is another anecdote for your consumption. I will move on here. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their uttermost strength. Soldiers in desperate traits lose the sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they are in the heart of a hostile country, they will show a stubborn front. If there is no help for it, they will fight hard. Thus, without waiting to be marshaled, the soldiers will constantly be on the alert, and without waiting to be asked, they will do your will. Without restrictions, they will be faithful. Without giving orders, they can be trusted. Prohibit the taking of omens and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. If soldiers are not overburdened with money, it is not because they have a distaste for riches. If their lives are not unduly long, it is not because they are disinclined to longevity. On the day they are ordered out to battle, your soldiers may weep, some sitting up, bedewing their garments, and some lying down, letting the tears run down their cheeks, not because they are afraid, but because all have embraced the firm resolution to do or die. But let them once be brought to bay, and they will display the courage of a Chuan Chu or a Cao Kui. And here you're going to read about those, so do that on your own, and we'll meet back here. The skillful tactician may be likened to the shuazhan. Now, the shuazhan is a snake that is found in the Chiang Mountains. Strike at its head, and you will be attacked by its tail. Strike at its tail, and you will be attacked by its head. Strike at its middle, and you will be attacked by head and tail both. Asked if any army can be made to imitate the shuangzhan, answer yes. For the men of Wu and the men of Yu are enemies, yet if they are crossing a river in the same boat and are caught by a storm, they will come to each other's assistance just as the left hand helps the right. It is not enough to put one's trust in the tethering of horses and the burying of chariot wheels in the ground. It is not enough to render flight impossible by such mechanical means. You will not succeed unless your men have tenacity and unity of spirit, and above all, a spirit of sympathetic cooperation. This is the lesson which can be learned from the shuizhan. The principle on which to manage an army is to set up one standard of courage that all must reach. How to make the best of both strong and weak is a question involving the proper use of ground. The skillful general conducts his army just as though he were leading a single man by the hand. It is the business of a general to be quiet and thus ensure secrecy, upright and just, and thus maintain order. He must be able to mystify his officers and men by false reports and appearances, and thus keep them in total ignorance. Another anecdote for you. We'll meet on the other side of it. By altering his arrangements and changing his plans, the skillful general keeps the enemy without definite knowledge. By shifting his camp and taking circuitous routes, he prevents the enemy from anticipating his purpose. At the critical moment, the leader of an army acts like one who has climbed up a height and then kicks away the ladder behind him. He carries his men deep into hostile territory before he shows his hand. He burns his boats and breaks his cooking pots. Like a shepherd driving a flock of sheep, he drives his men this way and that, and none knows whither he is going. To muster his host and bring it into danger, this may be termed the business of the general. The different measures suited to the 9 varieties of ground, the expediency of aggressive or defensive tactics, and the fundamental laws of human nature, these are things that must certainly be studied. When invading hostile territory, the general principle is that penetrating deeply brings cohesion. Penetrating but a short way means dispersion. When you leave your own country behind and take your enemy across neighboring territory, you find yourself on critical ground. When there are means of communication on all 4 sides, the ground is one of intersecting highways. When you penetrate deeply into a country, it is serious ground. When you penetrate but a little way, it is facile ground. When you have the enemy's strongholds on your rear and narrow passes in front, it is hemmed-in ground. When there is no place of refuge at all, it is desperate ground. On dispersive ground, inspire your men with unity of purpose. On facile ground, see that there is close connection between all parts of the army. On contentious ground, hurry up your rear guard. On open ground, keep a vigilant eye on your defenses, fearing a surprise attack. On ground of intersecting highways, consolidate your alliances. On serious ground, ensure a continuous stream of supplies. On difficult ground, keep pushing along the road. On hemmed-in ground, block any way of retreat to make it seem that you mean to defend the position, whereas your real intention is to burst suddenly through the enemy's lines. Now, if you go back and look at this, you'll notice he's gone back again to those 9 situations. And so, again, wherever you're taking notes, you can go back and fill in with each of these pieces of information. Okay, please read this on your own, and we'll meet over here. On desperate ground, Proclaim to your soldiers the hopelessness of saving their lives. The only chance of life lies in giving up all hope of it. For it is the soldier's disposition to offer an obstinate resistance when surrounded, to fight hard when he cannot help himself, and to obey promptly when he has fallen into danger. Here is an incidence of danger for your consumption. We'll meet on the other side. We cannot enter into alliance with neighboring princes until we are acquainted with their designs. We are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we are familiar with the face of the country, its mountains and forests, its pitfalls and precipices, its marshes and swamps. We shall be unable to turn natural advantages to account unless we make use of local guides. To be ignorant of any one of the following 4 or 5 principles does not befit a warlike prince. When a warlike prince attacks a powerful state, his generalship shows itself in preventing the concentration of the enemy's forces. He overawes his opponents, and their allies are prevented from joining against him. In attacking a powerful state, if you can divide her forces, you will have a superiority in strength. If you have a superiority in strength, you will overawe the enemy. If you overawe the enemy, the neighboring states will be frightened, and if the neighboring states are frightened, the enemy's allies will be prevented from joining her. Hence, he does not strive to ally himself with all and sundry, nor does he foster the power of other states. He carries out his own secret designs, keeping his antagonists in awe. And thus, he is able to capture their cities and overthrow their kingdoms. Bestow rewards without regard to rule. Issue orders without regard to previous arrangements, and you will be able to handle a whole army as though you had to do with but a single man. In order to prevent treachery, your arrangements should not be divulged beforehand. There should be no fixity in your rules and arrangements. Confront your soldiers with the deed itself. Never let them know your design. When the outlook is bright, bring it before their eyes, but tell them nothing when the situation is gloomy. Place your army in deadly peril, and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits, and it will come through in safety. Here's another anecdote for your consumption. We're going to pick up on the other side of that anecdote. For it is precisely when a force has fallen into harm's way that it is capable of striking a blow for victory. Success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose. If the enemy shows an inclination to advance, lure him on to do so. If he is anxious to retreat, delay on purpose that he may carry out his intention. By persistently hanging on the enemy's flanks, we shall succeed in the long run in killing the commander-in-chief, a vital act in war. On the day that you take up your command, block the frontier passes, destroy the official tallies, and stop the passage of all emissaries, either to or from the enemy's country. Be stern in the council chamber so that you may control the situation. If the enemy leaves the door open, you must rush in. Forestall your opponent by seizing what he holds dear and subtly contrive to time his arrival on the ground. Walk in the path defied by rule and accommodate yourself to the enemy until you can fight a decisive battle. At first, then, exhibit the coyness of a maiden until the enemy gives you an opening. Afterward, emulate the rapidity of a running hare, and it will be too late for the enemy to oppose you.